I'm the education co-lead for the Collective for Climate Action, and that's kind of my capacity here today. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about climate change and positive actions, and just make sure that everyone can see my screen. Is that okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. So here we go. So why do anything on climate change? What's the point in acting? It's a global issue. One person can't really make a difference, and other countries continue to emit so much. The UK only makes up 1 to 2% of all our emissions globally. So what's the point? And also it can cost me money. So why do anything? Well, nature's in decline. We don't live in nature, but we're still part of nature. We're reliant on it for pretty much everything that we get. Even if people are just mining rocks in the middle of the desert, they still need food, which comes from agriculture, which can only function in a reasonably well-maintained natural environment. And it's declining really quickly. We're going through the sixth mass extinction at the moment. And for example, like the Great Barrier Reef has lost 50% of its corals in the last few years. Bleaching events are happening twice as often now. We're getting more bad El Ninos, which are really causing problems around the world for, they're having impacts on fish stocks. And we continue to extract massive amounts of food from the oceans, for example. And they're a major source of protein for about 40% of the world's population. And this puts pressures on the food systems around the world, and also our ability to produce goods and services in those countries. Nature, it's also a perfect accountant, so it's got a global reach and it misses no rules being broken. It's effectively just a set of rules, unbreakable rules, really. And it doesn't accept any excuses or justifications for doing what we do, and it's totally dispassionate. So in many ways, it's really great that we're not that closely tied to nature in many ways, because we would be worried about being eaten by bears all the time, and starving to death. But luckily we're not in that situation. But the other side of it is we're quite buffered from what actually happens in distant parts of the world, to obtain resources that we need. So the consequences of breaking nature's laws are delayed. We live in a globalized economy, where work happens in many different parts of the world where we don't see the impact, but we won't, and we don't feel the consequences just yet, or we're just starting to feel those consequences. So we can accumulate a lot of damage before actually things start to go wrong, or before we start to see things going wrong. And this makes the consequences more severe because we're racking up more and more, environmental debt effectively in the damages that we've done. So you look at places like the Canadian tar sands, and this is what they look like before we start extracting. And then after they start extracting, it looks like this. They take away all the topsoil and the vegetation, and nature's basically cleaned away. And then they just start mining the sands that are soaked with bitumen, to get the oil out of it, basically. And they try and put the topsoil back on top of it afterwards. But what happens is nature's got to start from scratch. It's got to grow back, and that takes decades. And in that time, climate change is still happening, and that ecosystem is much more vulnerable. Also, you look at places like the Niger Delta, where Shell oil are operating massively there, and it's one of the most degraded environments in the world. This should be a really productive ecosystem, but what happens is, like the forests in Canada are less resilient. They're more likely to burn when they're recovering because of the heat stresses, and because it's a less healthy ecosystem. And like the rainforest, in this area of Nigeria, it's less productive. It can feed less people and sustains a poorer ocean because all the water flowing out of it is all polluted. And the fish living in the coastal regions, which are usually the most fertile areas of the oceans often, they're not being able to reproduce in the same way they could. And also these ecosystems can sequester and store much less carbon, because they're just unhealthy. They can't grow as effectively. And it also makes them more likely to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we're still deforesting the world to the tune of the size of the UK every year. And it seems astonishing, but it's still happening. And these are the most biodiverse and vulnerable forests in the world too. So much of it's from growing soybean in South America, and also the production of palm oil in the rainforests or the peat bogs and rainforests in Sumatra and Indonesia. And these brown countries here are the ones that are driving it, because these countries here are deforesting their land to produce goods and services to the countries that are using them. And one of the conflicts about palm oil really is, if we were to stop using palm oil, then we'd need up to 4 times as much land to produce it with, say, sunflower seeds or other plant products. So there are some complicated questions that we have to answer. But when you look at the Amazon, it's already past the tipping point in many areas. So there are more vulnerable dry areas that have been deforested, and the Amazon creates its own rain, but it's becoming less and less able to do this. And so these more vulnerable areas are now dying out, and the only way that we can reverse that decline is by us taking action and supporting initiatives to actually reforest them. And the one thing to remember is that ecosystems that haven't been damaged yet, they're much stronger, they're more resilient to climate change. So if we act now to preserve the ones that are already existing, they're going to be the ones that they're going to help us through this fight much more effectively than ones that we rebuild ourselves. So healthier nature is more resilient, but to climate change. But what's happening is we're continuing to degrade nature and the land that it needs, and it can't adapt with us taxing its resources of land and habitat all the time. So we've got to think about the best ways to play by nature's rules. So as I said earlier, established ecosystems are much stronger. And if you get a chance to read either of these books, they're really interesting. But Peter Wohlleben, who wrote The Hidden Life of Trees, he talked about a tree stump that was 400 years old that he found, and it was still alive in this really fertile forest in Germany. And the reason why is because underneath the soil, there's a massive network of fungal roots or fungal mycelium, and also like tree roots. And they produce this massive interconnected network where the fungi produce the nutrients or the vitamins to the trees, and the trees provide the energy, and they all use each other's network of root systems through the soil to communicate and exchange nutrients. And the reason why this tree stump was still alive is because the forest was really healthy, and the forest could still use the root system that this tree had, even though the tree wasn't producing any energy for the fungi and the other trees to live on at all. So the more connected we are, the more resilient we are, basically. The more resources of ours that we can use and we can exploit. So it's really important to try and keep that connection or build that connection in the communities that we have. So if you can imagine what it would be like in the pandemic if we didn't have the internet to share information about where people were and where people were getting sick and all that kind of thing, then it would cause massive problems. But when we think about playing by nature's rules, saving healthy ecosystems is much more effective than rebuilding old ones. And also, one of the other things to do is to clean up after ourselves, because that's how we preserve those healthy ecosystems. Waste like plastic is really easy to see and it's really conspicuous. But also, if we think about like carbon dioxide, for every litre of petrol or diesel you burn in your car, you produce about 2.5 kilograms of CO2. And if you imagine like cars driving down a road and just dropping bags of CO2, 2 kilogram bags of it on the roads would be unusable in a few hours. So there's a lot of mess that we're creating, but just because we don't see, we're just not paying attention to cleaning it up. So the two sides to climate change really is adaptation and mitigation. So adaptation is adapting to the change as it happens, and mitigation is stopping it or slowing climate change. And we obviously need to do both. And often, luckily, actions taken in either area have an impact in the other. But we get people now coming up with really clear statements like the chief executive or the chair, sorry, of the Environment Agency saying that we need to adapt or die. And actually, that's a factually clear statement. In the UK, we've been really lucky. We've had hardly any loss of life from flooding over the last few decades. But as we saw in Europe, it is stuff that's actually starting to happen. So we've got to take this really seriously. And adaptation builds resilience. But adaptive actions are usually local ones. So buying local helps to secure local supply chains. So if you buy local from farmers, then it will cost more generally. But what happens is they can invest more in their infrastructure and they're less vulnerable to global supply chain problems like that we saw through the pandemic and what's been happening with us with the gas shortage. And if we grow local, obviously we're much more resilient then because we've got our own seeds, we've got our own produce, we don't have to worry about any supply chain issues really. And also growing local, we can do it in community groups. So community groups and projects, there's loads of great resources out there. The Guardian did a massive piece on a whole different group of different set of community projects that people can look up. By the way, I should say there's links in almost every single one of these pictures, and there's links through all the text in here as well. So I wanted this presentation to be a resource that people can use later as well. But basically, if you're doing stuff locally and working as part of a community, that builds resilience into your community because you build up a network of people that you're communicating with and sharing knowledge and information and ideas and work with. So thinking about other sides, the more practical sides are, using water butts. We are going to need to maintain our gardens and allotments, food growing spaces more effectively under the dry summers that we are predicting. We're going to have wetter winters and we will have wet weather events in the summer as well, but we're going to have a lot more prolonged dry spells. So saving water consumption saving water from rain is really important. Also, you might have seen the No Mow May thing going around in lots of councils in the UK, where wildflowers are being grown on verges and stuff like that. And these produce like food for pollinators, but also habitats for insects that live in them. If you walk through meadows in the countryside, you can hear crickets in them a lot of the time, and they may not feed on the pollen, but they live in the grasses, and that's the same for loads of other insect species in them. But also just growing more flowers in your garden that pollinators can feed on is really important too. And having that ready available water supply is really, really important to get through those dry spells and make those plants productive during those periods. One of the other things you can do is join a climate community locally. There was an Extinction Rebellion community in Nailsea where I live. They've now changed to a climate action community because they found that XR was a little bit difficult or not very palatable for people in the local community. They still do those actions, but they primarily focus on what they were focusing on before, really locally, which is trying to stop airports from being extended, those kinds of things. But XR is a really diverse community, and you don't have to be gluing yourself to buildings or stopping the M25 to help build the conversation in those areas. You can even do online protests with them as well. But becoming part of a community is one of the biggest steps that people can take to building resilience in their communities, driving forward the agenda on climate change, and also building your own resilience. Being part of a community is where you can share thoughts and feelings about how you worry about these issues and gain ideas on how to address them. But it doesn't have to be in person all the time. I used to be part of a local community, like I said, but I'm not anymore. I basically dedicate all my kind of volunteer time to doing stuff for the CFCA, or the Collective for Climate Action, and doing events like this. But one of the other things we can do is buy better quality goods and food or services. So material goods, if they're better quality, then they're going to last longer and they're less likely to break. And this mitigates climate change as well as being an adaptive measure because, for example, fast fashion has a massive impact on the environment. And you can find out more about how to reduce your footprint from clothes and preserve them better or pass them on to worthy causes through WRAP. They've got some great resources on that. And also this documentary here called The True Cost. It's a really good place to start to just hear about some of the ideas. But with a lot of these documentaries that you may or may not have seen, there's obviously they can obviously be a bit sensational as well. So it's good to do a bit of reading around them, but they're an excellent way to start the conversation and start you thinking about these issues. But basically, buying better quality stuff means that you're going to use less of it. And for example, the Fairphone is an Android phone, and they're about 450 quid, and they've got 5-year warranties on them. And they've got ethically sourced parts, so you don't have as many issues with people doing really unsavory practices or working in dangerous areas like children down mines, getting rare earth minerals to stick in phones. A lot more of it comes from sustainable sources and places where people have good working conditions, and they're well priced, and you can just peel the back off them to get to the components. So if you need a new battery, which a phone would need in the 5-year lifetime of it, you can just click it out and stick a new battery in. You don't need to take it to a shop or anything. So they're a really good way to think about buying something that's going to last longer. And also with food, if you buy better quality food, it lasts longer in your fridge, and that helps you to reduce waste of food. But also, the more expensive food is, the better it's being produced as a rule. So that also helps build resilience in the farming industry and free up the farming industry to actually be more ambitious in taking action to make their practices more sustainable. But also, adaptation for heat waves is a really important one. If you have heard about the town of Lytton in Canada, it broke Canada's highest temperature record by 5 degrees in one go. Now, and heat is the biggest killer in the world from climate change. And although Lytton burnt down the day after it broke that record, we're not going to see that kind of stuff in the United Kingdom just because we don't have, forest fires, basically because we've cut down all our forest. But preventing sunlight from entering your house is one of the most important adaptive measures you can do for heat waves, which we are definitely going to have more of in the future. We've got double glazing in our house, and we've got grey aluminium double glazing. We've got no external shutters on our house, so when the sun comes in, even if we shut the curtains on the inside of the house, it's like a radiator inside the house. So even when we shut our windows and try and keep the cold in that we've gathered up through the night, the house is quickly heating up in the day. But if you have shutters or awnings or porches or any of those kinds of things that you may put on your house when you're adapting it in future, or just modifying it, shutters are the cheapest ones obviously, then they stop the heat or the sunlight from even getting in through your double glazed windows. And that's the real key. Also insulating your house. Obviously this will pay for itself very quickly, but cavity wall insulation is a really important and cheap way to do it. It costs hundreds of pounds, but your heating bills in the winter will be reduced. very quickly, so that within a couple of years it will have paid for itself, and maybe shorter than that. And also putting loft insulation in. The recommendation is to have 25 centimetres thick insulation in your roof. We don't have that. And one of the problems when we have a heat wave is lofts gather up so much heat in the day and they bleed it out into the places that we're trying to sleep. And when it's nighttime, your body's trying as hard as it can to cool down as effectively as possible. And if you don't have a restful night's sleep, it's harder to function the next day. And if you're really old, then actually it can cause heat death. So it's a really important thing to do, and both of those options they're relatively cheap and they will pay for themselves in reducing your heating bills. Also try and think about adapting your thinking. When we talk about the cost of things or the price of things, we don't factor in how much environmental damage is being done to produce those goods. Basically, very few companies on the planet clean up after themselves after they produce the goods that they do. And that's one of the reasons why buying things made in the UK is more expensive than buying something from China, is because a company that works in the UK has more stringent environmental regulation to go through to produce those goods. So it has to do more cleaning up after itself. So we're not paying the full price for almost anything that we buy because we're not paying for all the environmental damage that's being done by producing those goods, even in the UK. So if you pay more for sustainable stuff, you're paying to preserve the environment, and that's more of the true cost of actually producing that good than if you were getting it for the cheapest price on Amazon, for example. Also think about the future. We are going to be materially poorer in future because we're going through a transition, from fossil fuels to sustainable energy, and that's going to be difficult, and there are going to be some winners and losers. Hopefully there's going to be fewer losers if we do this well, but transitions are never easy, and we're going to have less resources going forward, and we're also going to be paying a lot more for those resources, as I said, or for those goods that we're getting, because we should be trying to pay for more of the true cost of those things. So if you can think about the idea of, do I need it when you're buying something? And if you don't need it, then just make sure that you really, really want it before you get it, because reducing the amount of stuff we buy is one of the most important things that we can do as individuals. Now, there are some things that also can save you money that help with climate change as well. So buying secondhand off eBay or Gumtree. Gumtree even has a free space now where you can get stuff for nothing. Also, FreeCycle is a really great space to find a lot of things. It takes a little bit of time to watch it because you have to keep an eye because things go really quickly. But as long as you've got the time to go and pick it up, you can get some amazing stuff for nothing. And you can know that you're reducing your carbon footprint because you're not buying new goods that have, again, not incorporated the cost of producing them in the first place. Changing your fuel provider is a great way to do this as well. It can cost more, but it can also save you money in a lot of instances as well. The Centre for Sustainable Energy has really good resources on this. Again, these are all links, so you can link to these websites if you want to have a look at them. But the CSE, they'll help you understand how to manage your home in a more sustainable way. But the Money Saving Expert website, they've got a great Cheap Energy Club page where you can just basically find the best producer for you, and they even talk to you about sustainable providers in detail. So you can find a sustainable energy provider on there and make it so that all your electricity at least is coming from wind turbines or solar panels. And it's really important that we support these industries as much as we can, because the fossil fuel industry is subsidised massively throughout the world, and it's really slowing the transition down at the moment because the renewable industry isn't getting that same subsidy. It's basically getting most of the money it needs from people buying its products, and that's not the case for fossil fuels. Also, think about repairing your stuff. There are these things called repair cafes, and there's another link to the website there. They've got a map around the UK, but they're growing around the world as well. You can just take things to them that are broken, and people will repair them for nothing. It's like a community-driven initiative, and it's a great way to just find out if you can get some more life out of something that's been sitting around your house broken for months on end. Also, repairing things in general, just electrical goods, audio repair will repair all of those things. You send it off to them, and they send you a quote as to whether you want to repair it or not. Basically, it's important to try and repair things because it uses less resources. So often you'll hear this phrase, you may as well get a new one. But getting the new one, again, doesn't really consider the cost to the environment of buying that new good or producing that new good. So refitting a few tiny components in an electrical item or something like that is a much more sustainable way of like giving something a longer life or using something than it is to buy something completely new and use all the resources that were made or used to produce that good. If you want to reduce your own personal footprint, then you can check out Geeky Zero. That's a really good carbon reduction app that we support in the collective, and we'll be rolling out a different version of that that they've allowed us to do through the premium version very soon. But that's a really good kind of gamified way of kind of helping to encourage you to reduce your own footprint. It gives you all sorts of ways to do that. But also there's other things, like I'm actually using an old tablet at the moment on my PC to as a second screen, and you download this app on here, and what happens is you just plug in with a cable your tablet into your computer, and even if it's a really outdated old iPad or an Android tablet or something, it will still work as a second screen, and it will cost like £5 on Android, and it doesn't cost anything if you've got an Apple device. So have a go at repairing things. Like, this is one of my slippers. After about 2 or 3 months, the side of it just fell apart, and they're really comfortable. So I had a go at repairing them, and no one has to see me schlubbing around the house in them, so I don't have to worry about looking like a hobo. But at the same time, I've got some comfortable slippers that are really warm that I'm going to carry on using until they fall apart properly. So, have a go yourself. Also, it's important to think about some of the claims that are made. Now, the Carbon Literacy Project is a really good project that we support in the CFCA, but some of the claims can get confused in a lot of these kinds of things. So when it comes to the really tiny ones, I'd say don't sweat the small stuff, because here, one of the things that's made, and you'll hear this a lot, but they say about 50 grams of CO2 is produced for every megabyte of emails sent. So that's the average size of a big email in inverted commas. But when we're watching stuff on streaming television, for example, and you can change your settings on Netflix if you go into your account on a computer, you can change the streaming speed or the streaming bandwidth. But when you're on Amazon, you can't do that. Most people have an ultra high definition television, whether they know it or not. If you bought one in the last couple of years, you'll be streaming in UHD on Amazon. And the problem with that is you're burning through 6 to 7 gigabytes an hour worth of data just watching TV. So that is about 350,000 grams of carbon compared to your 50 grams of CO2 here, which I don't think is true. And that works out as 350 kilograms of carbon for an hour of TV, and 1 ton if you're watching a reasonably long movie. And your average footprint for a British person a year is 5 to 7 tons. So basically this claim here, it's been confused or worked out in some strange way. But with these tiny things, just don't worry about it. If you are worried about your streaming footprint, then obviously just stream on a tablet if you're watching Amazon, and change your settings on Netflix online if you want to change that too. But the small stuff, don't worry about it too much. And this is a part of it, is people understanding exactly what the issues are and what the most important actions are. So Ipsos Mori, a polling company in the UK, they did a survey of what the top 3 most impactful actions were that people thought they could take to address the climate and biodiversity crisis. So recycling comes out top, buying from a sustainable energy or renewable energy supplier came out second, buying an electric car was third, light bulbs fourth, hang drying or not using your dryer was fifth, then taking a long distance flight was far down the order here, not having a car was like lowest, one of the lowest ones, plant-based diet was one of the lowest, and not having one for your child was the absolute lowest. But when you look at what the actual terms were, they got the order completely out of whack. And when you look at it in a different way here, we can see that having one for your child, the most unpalatable of all of these things, not something that I'm asking anyone to do, is actually by far the biggest one. That's a huge footprint there, 58 tons of carbon in the lifetime of a child. But not having a car was the second biggest one, and avoiding a flight was the third, and then buying energy from a renewable supplier, which can actually save you money, was fourth. And then going down the order, we can see that there's a whole range of different solutions there. But if we look here, it illustrates it a bit more clearly. We can see that a lot of the smaller actions that people worry about doing every day, the ones that really stress us out and keep us thinking about this like really pressurized and difficult issue to solve, they're the ones that don't make very much difference. Eating a plant-based diet, that's a big decision that you could make in your life, and you'll do it every day. But travel represents most of the big decisions that we can make. So switching to an electric vehicle, buying green energy is a good one, obviously. Avoiding flying is obviously 1 round trip a year. Transatlantic flight, that's a big footprint. But if you fly a lot, then just cutting down makes a huge difference. And living car free, here we go, that's another part of it as well. But remembering what the most impactful things to do are is really important, because actually time is of the essence. So reducing our footprints quickly and effectively helps us to fight or slow down climate change. And the more we can preserve the environment that we have now, makes it much more effective, that we'll be able to have a better future going forward. So with the flying thing, just to illustrate that, a medium-sized car produces more carbon per kilometre than a short-haul flight does. But actually no one drives as far as they fly. So no one's going to do a round trip to Athens to go on holiday with a 3,000-mile trip. And if you were to fly, that's almost a ton of carbon dioxide just flying to Athens as a round trip. and obviously far less than your streaming footprint, if you can believe what we saw earlier. But also the reason why flying is so bad is because of this effect from radiative forcing. So it's not just the CO2, it's the non-CO2 greenhouse effects that come from nitrous oxides coming out of the exhaust, and also the condensation clouds that come out the back of the planes. They effectively double the effect of warming from flying. So if we look here, that's the effect from nitrous oxide and those small clouds, the condensation trails that come out the back of planes. And none of that happens from a car. And also this red part, this also happens if you emit this at ground level. It takes decades for it to get up into the atmosphere. But as I was saying before, warming now is stuff that we need to avoid as much as possible. So this warming here is stuff that happens immediately. This happens up in the atmosphere straight away. Those clouds warm the earth, nitrous oxide warms the earth straight away. But this CO2 emitted at ground level, half of that gets soaked up by the environment anyway. So flying is one of the things that you can cut out to really effectively reduce your carbon footprint. So thinking about travel more widely, think about the cost again, because obviously flying is really cheap and it's been subsidised. They don't get taxed on fuel, they don't get taxed for any of the parts and stuff that they need or servicing. So basically, again, like the fossil fuel industry getting heavily subsidised against renewables, aviation gets massively subsidised against all the other forms of travel as well. So, if you're thinking about the cost of travelling around Europe, for example, there's loads of amazing holidays that you can go on all by land. And the rail network around Europe's really, really great. So I went to see my sister in Dusseldorf a couple of years ago, and it was £130 return, I think, going from London to Dusseldorf. And that was on the Eurostar and the Intercontinental Express through Germany. Now, these are all high-speed trains. When we went on this train, it was me and my brother, we were looking for ages to find standard class, and we realised that the whole train was standard class, but it all looked like first class. It was so nice to travel in. And when you go from like London to Marseille to get to the Mediterranean, you can do that in 6 hours on a train. No check-in times, and you don't have to wait for your luggage. You just get on and get off. It is more expensive, but also you've got to remember that you're paying to not damage the environment effectively, because aviation is so damaging in terms of CO2. There are some great resources to find out how to travel, more easily through Europe. And the man in Seat 61 has like a really great website that talks you through everything. He's got a YouTube channel and all sorts of stuff. So it's great to find out more there if you want to lean into that a bit more. But cycling's obviously cheaper. You can reduce your carbon footprint, and you can increase your health and lessen your burden on the NHS. And that makes society more resilient, as making you more resilient as well. If you're healthier, then you'll live for longer, and you'll need less healthcare, and less will go wrong with you. So it's a really good thing. It's another mitigating measure that also helps build resilience in society. And obviously there's the other one, the obvious one of using public transport. So that's kind of in the car-free world, in terms of going back to that graph to see what the most effective measures are. Changing the way you travel is one of the most important ways, or most effective ways, that you can reduce your footprint. How about food? Well, out of all the habitable land on the earth, about 50% of it is used for agriculture, and 77% of that agricultural land is used to feed animals, or for grazing animals to produce meat and dairy. And only 23% of it goes to feed actual human beings. And when you look at this, the National Food Strategy report that was written for the government, reducing the amount of meat that we eat frees up masses of land. If you can see the amount of UK land that's taken up by meat and beef and lamb pastures, and ones for producing, or beef and lamb pastures, and ones for producing feed for them, then you can see that if we ate less beef and lamb, then we'd have loads more land that we could build more national resilience to produce more food. We're expecting more global food shocks. We've had them in the past already. There was one in the Middle East and Russia recently that's been touted as actually driving the conflict that happened in Syria. And also it leaves more room for nature to build up its resilience against climate change. As I said before, we're having a huge impact on the environment, and we're really hamstringing its ability to adapt to the fastest climate change that Earth has ever seen. So the more resilience we can build in nature, the more likely we are to have a productive ecosystem that provides us with clean water and insects to pollinate things, and just a way of capturing more carbon and addressing the climate crisis. And the UK has some of the most degraded land in Europe. So we've got a lot of, in many ways, the worse things are, the more we can do, and the more easily we can do them. So in some ways, that's a good thing. There's loads of difference we can make in the UK. One of the other things as well is electrifying everything. Now, there are ways that we can help out with this as individuals, but just to illustrate the whole thing, If we look at internal combustion engine cars, only 20 to 30% of the energy that we get out of the ground in the form of oil actually ends up powering the car. So about 10% of the energy we get from fossil fuels goes into drilling the oil, refining the oil, and transporting it so that we can get it pumped into our cars. An electric car doesn't need to refine any of its energy. If you've got solar panels in your house, that energy effectively is going straight from your house into your car. And it's there, it's ready to use. And the important thing to remember as well is it doesn't use any fuel because the fuel is free, effectively. It's just sunlight. Also, electric heat pumps that we're hearing a lot about in the news and trying to decarbonise heating in homes, they produce 3 times as much energy per unit of energy, 3 times as much heat per unit of energy as a gas boiler does. And if you use an induction hob, you can get away with having one kettle for the rest of your life. Like a solid steel kettle is not going to leak, it's not going to crack. And also it's more efficient. It will boil water quicker, and it's 80 to 90% efficient. And a gas one is only 40% efficient. And obviously, if you have a gas hob, you probably have a kettle on your side as well, which will probably break every 4 to 5 years or so, if you're a bit unlucky like me. But also you'll have better quality air in your house because you're not burning a fossil fuel in your house. As clean as gas is, it still has emissions. So even getting an old electric hob would be more efficient than having a gas one. So we've got an old one in our garage at the moment, and that alone would be 70% efficient on 40% that you would get from gas. So all these measures save emissions locally as well, so you have cleaner air. But people talk about biofuels. Biofuels rely on photosynthesis to grow plants, and that's 1% efficient. Solar panels produce 23% efficiency. So 23% of the light that falls on solar panels produces energy. But if you're making biofuels, then firstly, you've got to grow the plants, cut them down, process them, make them into fuel. And as we can see here, those steps will undermine that level of efficiency as well. That's just the efficiency of a plant growing in terms of using sunlight and CO2 to make itself grow. So biofuels are a really inefficient process to make fuels. They're carbon neutral, but they damage the environment, and we should only use them where absolutely necessary. Hydrogen, similarly, producing hydrogen, firstly, you've got to produce electricity to make the hydrogen. In some sort of way, making hydrogen, it doesn't exist abundantly naturally in the ecosystem or on Earth, so we have to produce it in some way. And as best as we can do it at the moment, it's only 40% efficient. And in the United States, this guy here, Saul Griffiths, he's one of the world leading energy analysts. I was listening to him talking about this a couple of days ago, and he was talking about how in the United States, if they electrified everything, they'd use 40% of the energy that we currently use. Overall, no other changes needed, no double glazing, no insulation, not even changing how much they heat their houses. So effectively, no sacrifices would be needed, and they'd use less than half the emissions or less than half the energy than they do today. And the real reason, one of the main reasons for this is you produce the energy in a form we need straight away, and the fuel is free. So you don't need coal, you don't need gas, you don't need to pay for anything to stick into your power stations or to stick into your solar panels. They need to be produced, but we need to produce the gas-fired power stations, the coal-fired power stations. So these are one of the main things that make it so that these are really disruptive technologies, and they are going to massively disrupt the whole energy system. So be ready for the change in this energy system that we're seeing at the moment. As I said earlier, fossil fuel industry is subsidised really heavily. $5 trillion goes towards subsidising the fossil fuel industry, and the global economy is only worth $133 trillion. So that's a huge amount of money propping up a dying system, which isn't going towards renewable energy. So if we can support it in any way we can, then we're really helping things move in the right direction. And when we talk about electric cars being expensive, in the USA, they're expected to become cheaper than internal combustion engine cars by 2025, and in Australia by 2023. These cars need less maintenance because they've got fewer moving parts. A diesel, an electric engine is expected to be able to go for up to 1 million miles. Not without charging, but without falling apart or having to be decommissioned. But fuel bills are easily much lower as well. We've got an electric car, and for 90p or £1, we can get 100 miles out of that car. In our diesel car, it costs us £10 for the same distance. Of course, we have to fill up more often, but it's so much cheaper. But everything makes a difference, but not everything's equally important. So all the things that we mentioned before, these are really important, probably bigger life decisions to think about. So think about your emissions over your lifetime, or the emissions over the lifetime of the things that you buy. So there's this thing called committed emissions, and currently with all the things that use fossil fuels that we have in the world today, we're going to reach 1.8 degrees. So we're going to have to decommission gas-fired power stations and coal-fired power stations, all those kinds of things early, so that we can stay within the 1.5 area. But when you think about the choices that you're going to have to make in your own life anyway, start thinking about electric. So your car, solar, heating your house, as I said, like air source heat pumps they're getting much more efficient, and the prices of these things are coming down really quickly. Think about how you cook. But the important thing to do is to start planning for these now. You can start saving money for these kinds of things, and as the price for all of these things is coming down, they'll probably be cheaper by the time you come round to actually being able to get them anyway. But when government schemes come out, they make things a lot cheaper as well. They do make it so that often there's an upfront cost, like getting solar panels on your house and stuff, but they do make it that they pay back for themselves. They pay for themselves much more quickly. So if you look out for those, it's a really, really important step to make. You're helping those industries, and you're helping to remove your carbon footprint today and going forward as well. So these are actually some of the biggest things that you can do to make an impact. And when people talk about range anxiety on electric cars, this Peugeot here, it's a 27 grand car. It's quite expensive, I suppose, still, but that price is coming down. But that gets 170 miles. And that's a range that's really, really well within the bounds of actually most journeys that anyone would take. So it's really important to start considering these things now. But also, you can help others who are already doing the work. So nature is a perfect accountant, as I said before, but climate's a global system. So anything we do makes a difference. But at the same time, it's about how much difference and where. So helping others doing the work, already doing it, helping people who are already doing the work is really important. And there are some great charities out there that we've got listed on our website that you can find. The Clean Air Task Force, they've been externally kind of selected by the Effective Altruism movement as one of the most effective climate charities out there. And what they do is they look at methane leaks in the fossil fuel industry and other smaller technologies like nuclear, carbon capture, and one of my favourites, algae, as ways to help reduce our emissions or capture emissions and sequester them again. One of the reasons methane is so important is because we've got loads of leaky infrastructure all over the world, actually, in the fossil fuel industry, and methane accounts for 40% of the current warming that we're seeing. And it also warms the planet really, really quickly. So it does it in a 10-year timescale or 12 years. After that, it kind of disappears from the atmosphere, but it's warming the world really quickly now. And at a rate of about 85 times more or 83 times more quickly than CO2 is. So they're really concentrating on that, like boring stuff, really. They're not replanting anything or saving the environment. But what they're doing is they're making sure that the really boring stuff that's really easy to do is getting done. And these guys estimated that for every $1 you donate to the Clean Air Task Force, they prevent 1 tonne of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. And if you think that your personal footprint is about 7 tonnes a year, that starts to make you realise just how much work can be done, or how much easy work can be done for us to solve massive parts of our emissions crisis and the climate and biodiversity situation that we're in. If you want to donate to rainforest work, or reforesting the world, or preventing the cutting down of rainforests, these guys are really good for that. You can see that Brazil is notably absent there, but most of the other rainforest nations in the world are all included. So these guys, they're also selected as the most effective, deforestation charity to go for, and they protect like the communities in those forests and help manage them better and prevent deforestation. Also, try and share the work that we're doing, or share the link of the CFCA or the Cross Government Climate Hub with other people. Just bringing people to our platform really helps us. The more people in that network, the more powerful it becomes, just like nature and the root systems that you find in forests. One of the things as well that we can all do is we're all communicators in some way, so we can let others know that we need this. We can also ask them how they feel about it. Often it's a really great way to start those conversations, but you let them know about what they can do to help as well, and let them know how much they can benefit from helping. Also, voting is really, really important. I'll be honest, I don't really have any real political leanings, but I would just vote, not now anyway, but I would vote for any party that had really ambitious climate targets. So talk to people about it. With the political side of things, policy only happens when the public will accept it. So people need to know how acting benefits them and why it's good for the transition and why it's good for them. Governments must be told that we support them to do this so that they can create the policies that we need. They've already made these legally binding commitments, which are not technically legally binding, but the 78% reductions by 2035. Also, they're being advised by almost every public body to do this. And they've signed the Paris Agreement to commit them to doing this. They've also signed the IPCC reports that come out from the United Nations. It's not just a bunch of academics that are warning everyone that this is bad and we need to act on it. All governments have signed these as well to warn each other, to say that we agree this is a problem and we need to sort it out. So we need to give them the mandate by showing the government that we are happy for them to be more ambitious on tackling the climate crisis. So ask yourselves, do you need it? That's a really important thing to do. Lowering your consumption is important, and it will help to free up resources for you to save for those big life decisions when they come around that you would make anyway, in terms of the boiler you replace or the car that you replace. Joining a group is a really important thing to do as well. Even the World Economic Forum, a bunch of faceless billionaires that fly to Davos every year and talk about what they can sort out in the world, they recommend this. Even they recommend this as one of the best things you can do. You know, you get support, you get access to good information, and you can grow the voice of other people just by joining those communities and drive ambition on the climate and biodiversity crisis. You know, you can join our hub. You know, we're a community. We've got events that are chosen by the community that we let people know about. We've got an events board. Also, we run discussion sessions every week that people can dial into whenever they want. And also, just joining the network help builds the strength and resilience and agility of the public sector. Just by having more connections on there, you know, bringing your knowledge, your passion, your connections as well. You know, often people think they've got not much to offer, but in fact, the more you look at actually the network that you have in your life, the more you can see there's loads for people, everyone has to offer for these communities. And just sharing makes a difference. Also, act soon. Anything we do now, it makes more of a difference and does more good by preserving the stuff that we have. Like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It's like the more we do now, the more impact it will have. It's like putting your foot down on an accelerator in a brand new car and seeing how fast you go compared to putting your foot down in an old, dilapidated car, which is what a lot of our environment is now, and seeing what difference it makes. So whilst the planet is the healthiest as it can be, it's going to bounce back faster. That's just what it looks like on your phone. That's Slack. That's our community. So you can use it on your computer at home. I know the DWP don't allow it on your work computers, but we're working on that. But you can use it on your phone. It's really effective. So not all actions are equal. We can all do something to make a difference. It doesn't matter who we are. You don't have to think about it every day. Charities are really useful. Sometimes the most useful way of addressing this situation. Talk about it. Join a group. The future will be materially poorer, but we can also still have better lives even within that world. So having less stuff doesn't mean we're going to have a worse future. Try and understand the problem as well. This is a really great documentary on iPlayer at the moment, and it helps to show just how interconnected everything is, how reliant we are on other countries, and also how we need to be more resilient around the world, and how we're on the edge of a massive change. If you look at our event that we did with Rethink X, they talk about all these disruptive technologies in transport, energy and food, and we are on the cusp of things really, really changing in a really good way as well. But we need to be careful. You know, even the United Nations IPCC reports can't see all the variables on these issues. So we've got to be careful about what, you know, not to get discouraged, because it's so hard to map out what our future is going to look like. And don't get complacent either. You know, we're the biggest variable in this. What we do is going to change the course of our trajectory, basically, whether we have a good future or we have to go through a really, really horrible, tough time. So, yeah, don't get discouraged, but try and understand the issue and remember there's something that everyone can do.